Reggie. I love Reggie. He's the best. I asked Reggie not to read my bio because I hate them. I hate bios. I think they're embarrassing. So I'll just tell y'all real quick. I'm a vet, obviously, and was in private practice for a couple of years before I landed in the shelter on accident, like most of us do, right? And I've now been at the Austin Humane Society for about 13 years. So when I'm talking about this topic, I'm talking about it from both perspectives, and the fact that I've been in private practice and worked with shelters, but also have been a veterinarian, and then now I'm running operations at the shelter. And so when I'm speaking about it, I'm coming from those perspectives. But every time I do this topic, I like to hear if you guys have other things that you've experienced or other thoughts, and you'll know what I mean when I go through. I'd love to hear them. So just pop up, let me know, or I'll just ask you. I know it's 8:30, but it's more fun if y'all add to it. So let's get going. So before, real quick though, I know a few of y'all are vets. Any other vets in the room? Awesome. Are you got private practitioners at all? Awesome. Just you. And then shelter vets, the other? Okay. And then how about technicians? Vet techs? Shelter staff? Okay, cool. Thank you. I just want to kind of have an idea of who we're talking about. So kind of what we're going to talk about today is not only how to build partnerships between private practices and animal shelters or rescue groups, or however you want to think of that. I'm going to say shelters, but just know I mean animal welfare groups collectively. But we're also going to talk about perspectives first, because I think it helps, just like when you're forming any relationship, to kind of know baseline where someone's coming from. So I'm going to start off with that piece. But I always like to mention, like, we all have the same goal, right? Our overarching goal is healthy pets and loving lifelong homes, hopefully. So that gives us a common ground to start with, whether we're veterinarians, whether we're shelter people. This is what we're going for ultimately. Okay, we're going to talk about background of sheltering a little bit, because you guys know it's evolved quite a bit, especially over the last 10 to 15 years. But back in the day, shelters were really about stray collection, public health, keeping strays off the street. There wasn't a big focus on adoption, rehoming. It was really get the nuisances off the street, and if the people don't show up, then we euthanize them, or end their lives in a few days. So that's evolved quite a bit. This is just an example of one on the left. But really, they've evolved into temporary homes now, where we're providing care and we're trying to get them ready for their new families. There's a lot more put into it. But also, there's been this big cultural shift towards adoption, right? Like, it's trendy to adopt now, which is really good for all of us, versus going and buying a puppy. Not that that's still going on, but the community expectation is also quite different. So people are expecting more. They don't just go to the shelter and say, I'm going to save an animal now. They want to know, did you fix both of his broken knees? Did you treat him for heartworms? You've made sure you've done a full body CAT scan and promised he has nothing wrong, right? Like, the expectation is quite different. There's also a lot more knowledge in shelter medicine. There's a shelter specialty now in veterinary medicine. There are a lot more studies being done about animals in shelters. We just have a lot more to work with, textbooks. Whereas before it was really about accumulating animals and ending their lives if their owners didn't come. And veterinarians are obviously a lot more involved in shelters. And that's critical. We'll talk about that a little bit more. So again, just talking about perspectives, just real quick summary of a day in the life of each. So the community veterinarian or the private practice veterinarian is really, they're focused on a lifetime of care for these pets. So from puppy to end of life, ideally. They're focused primarily on an individual at a time, and they're building personal relationships with the owners, because that's what allows them to provide care for the pet. Versus in the shelter, we're really focused, hopefully, unless we have animals staying for a long time, we're looking at short-term health and wellness. How can we keep them healthy while they're in the shelter? How can we get them ready for adoption as quickly as possible? How can we identify any issues the adopter needs to be aware of? And it's based more on herd health or population medicine, keeping the whole population healthy. So it's a little bit of a different slant. And those of you vets in the room that have done both know this, very acutely how different that can be. But there's also an emphasis on infectious disease prevention, and we're really just trying to get animals toward the front door. One of our things at Austin Humane Society is we always say, as we walk around and do rounds, we're saying, what do we need to do to get you to the front door? So we're trying to evaluate how fast we can get animals out into their new families and out back into the community. And these two can play well together, right? So in the shelter, we're trying to get them ready for adoption, get them into their new family, and then hopefully the community veterinarian takes over from there. So this is kind of a snapshot of a typical day in the life of a private practice vet. Feel free to jump in if you if I've missed anything. But you usually have a pretty hectic day. Back-to-back appointments that are 15 to 30 minutes. You have a couple hours for surgeries. You do a few surgeries. You've only probably don't have enough help, just like we do in the shelters. Being on the phone. One of my most, traumatic memories of private practice was you explain to the owner, and then you'd finish the 30-minute conversation, and then they'd say, "Can you call my husband and tell him to?" And you're like, "Can you tell him?" So just pointing out, it's very hectic. And the reason I'm talking about this, y'all are probably like, what are we doing? It's just so both perspectives can understand the other, because when we're asking for help from a private veterinarian, we want to understand kind of what their challenges and their struggles are as well, and how they make income and things like that, because it helps us be a little more appreciative of what they do offer, even if it's not, they give us $60,000 free, So we'll get to that, but that's kind of a typical day in the life of the private practice. This is the one in the shelter. I think this is most days. Bomb going off. They're intake appointments, transfers, walk-ins, right? You're doing workups, high volume surgeries. Like the private practice, you're often understaffed. There's customer follow-up, managing the population, managing volunteers and donors, probably a million other things as well. So all that to say, we're all busy, okay? That's all I'm getting at. Okay. So this is the part, I love to hear y'all's thoughts if you have other things. And I put this up here. Sometimes it feels like with this slide I'm trying to pick a fight. So that's not what I'm trying to do. But these are things that I've heard, experienced, or been aware of from other presentations on this that other people have brought up. Is what are shelter rescue groups sometimes misconceptions or opinions on veterinarians? And again, we're talking about this because we want to talk about how we can overcome these barriers to partnering, and we're going to have one from the vet perspective as well. So feel free to let me know if you have other ones besides these. But sometimes I'll hear vets are all about the money. They don't want to help us because they don't want to lose money, right? And we'll talk about that in a slide here, in a couple of slides, about how their small business ownership works. They don't understand how shelters work. And that might be true. And my answer to that is, well, show them, invite them in, tell them what you do, explain why you make the decisions you make, explain what your challenges are, give them a tour. Don't just assume that they're going to know, because you're right. Vets don't come out of vet school knowing how shelters work unless they've been in one of the programs where they rotate through shelters, and those are expanding, but they're not in every vet school. We send them so many new clients and we get nothing in return. Well, then it's up to you to ask for what you want in return, or ask if there's anything that you need from them in return for referrals. All vets need them, right? They tell adopters to return sick and injured pets. This is a big one. Does this happen to you guys? You get the pet back and the adopter says, "My vet said I should bring it back and you should take care of it, or you should pay for it." And remember, there's always like 3 sides to every story, so who knows exactly what was said. But we've experienced this quite a bit at Austin Humane Society. And usually those are vets who aren't familiar with how things run at our shelter. They may not even know we have vets on staff. Sometimes they're telling the adopter because the adopter can't pay for the services and they don't really know what else to tell them. So they're like, well, maybe go back and ask them if they can help you. So some of this, we'll talk through these barriers later, so don't worry. We'll talk about how to get around some of this stuff and fix it. They aren't willing to donate their time or services. Again, ask and be gracious. They think everything in the shelter is sick. This is where, again, it's just communication, right? Like a lot of these are just communication and explaining to them how things work and what you do and what your protocols are. They either think we should save everything or euthanize everything. This one's my personal one. That one's happened to me a lot. Does that come up for y'all? In my early years at the shelter, we euthanized more. We didn't have as many resources as we have now, and didn't do as many diagnostics. And I would call these vet partners and they would say, well, why can't you do blah, 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 blah? And I'd be like, my hands are tied. This is the extent I can go to. Now we'll send things that are, needing, I think the one that's most poignant, I remember seeing a dog that was paralyzed in the rear, and he was otherwise okay, but he needed a wheelchair, but he also had bladder stones, and we were asking them if they could help us with the surgery for that. And they said, why are you spending money on this dog when there are so many other dogs? And that's where you have an opportunity to explain what your shelter's philosophy is and where you draw lines on euthanasia and why. And that varies between all of us, right? So in our situation, we had a donor that was paying for this dog's surgery, but I also explained to them we're not in a position where saving this dog means we have to kill another dog, thankfully. So we're able to do both. So we're gonna take care of him and hopefully, see where that goes for him. Okay. Oh, before I go on, anybody have any other ones? Things that have come up it's okay, it's a safe place. Other things that you've heard or you felt? Yes, ma'am.
I guess maybe it fits in one of these, but just people thinking that we don't know how to do surgery, or that we.
Yeah, that's a great one, actually.
Like I had someone call me and they were like, "My veterinarian said that you were supposed to take off the scrotum," and we're like, "That's a scrotal ablation, and we don't do that in the state."
Yeah, that's not the same thing. That's a great point. Thank you for saying that, because I really should have that up here, because we get that too. And we'll get, that people say, my vet said you get what you pay for, or they assume you're a hack shack because you do high volume, right? And that that one's always tough to navigate, because now you've got a mutual client that's in the middle and they've already been set up to distrust you. But we've tried to navigate that with, we've seen thousands of, we've done thousands of these surgeries, and this is typically how this works, or if there's a complication, explaining how you normally handle it.
We're the specialists. You want to be your specialist? Come to us. We've done thousands and thousands of them.
Right. And that's where it's also, maybe not in the moment when you're still pissed about that, but at some point it's nice to find out who the vet is, because maybe you can call them later when you've calmed down a little bit, or you can invite them in and say, hey, I know this happened. I just wanted you to see how we do things so you'll know in the future, kind of how it runs. But other ones? Yes.
That we're actually stealing clients from them.
Right.
Which is my new mission, because I know there's some studies that are out there that are just like, actually, shelters tend to give you a lot more clients than take away, but that is constant, especially in my neighborhood. And then we also get, which is kind of annoying as well, is that we have a different vaccine protocol in a shelter environment.
Yes.
And then we have people go to vets, and it's only certain vets, and they're just like, no, that's not correct, and they want to revaccinate everything again just because it feels
they
like
think you did it wrong.
Them, or they saying that we did it wrong, but they want to charge them extra and get that, kind of out of them. Then that's crazy.
Or add on other vaccine. Yeah. Those are very valid. That the shelter is over-vaccinated. Those are all good, because they all kind of fall under one umbrella, which I clearly need to add, is sort of this opinion that maybe the shelters don't know what they're doing, right? And I think that's on the next one. But
private practice standpoint, nobody ever explained to me until about a month ago why that's an every 2-week protocol. And nobody ever explained it, and I asked him, I don't know. And I'm like, because private practice, I'm like, well, that should be the height of immunity about 2 weeks. So
right.
Why are you boostering at the height of immunity? And it was finally explained to me, because you're trying to catch right when the maternal immunity ends. And I was like,
oh.
Okay, that makes sense. Because I'm looking at all these animals coming in, and I'm like, are they doing it just to get the 3 vaccines in before they get out the door? And I'm like, but it doesn't make any damn sense to me, because nobody ever explained it. And all I needed was, once they told me that, I was like, okay, great, that's awesome. Now I understand why.
That's perfect.
So yeah, it can be frustrating for the other side too, because you ask somebody, like, I don't know, that's just their protocol.
Thank you for being open that way.
Yeah.
Sometimes,
and we're not going to pick on you, but you are our only one. So you have to speak up.
And I would just be like, I learned this is like the height of immunity is at like 2 weeks. This is so asinine that it's being done that way, and nobody can give me a good reason why it's being done that way. So then you draw your own conclusions, because nobody has a good answer for you. And then once I find it out, I'm like, oh.
So that's, that I didn't plant her, but obviously communication is so important, right, guys? Like throughout this, a lot of it is just typical relationships, right? Just relationships is what it's about. Yes, ma'am. Take another.
Okay, I don't think you say from the shelter side of it.
Right.
Okay? The vets actually, there's a lot of
There's a row of them right behind you, so be careful. And they have coffee. So.
vets get the medicine so cheap, and they quadruple or more the price, because I have purchased medicine from the manufacturers, and I can get a bottle, say 100 pills I'm speaking as far as
No. Yeah. Well, and so we'll talk some about it.
but there's a lot of vets that do that,
Yeah.
and it's not really fair. Because
So
That's how we keep our doors open too.
yeah, and we're gonna go into that.
And we are a for-profit business, but we have to keep our doors open, so.
I don't know, but it's like from like a $2 bottle bill to $100 bill. Just selling one cake for 100 is like, is making $100 out of that
It's
$100.
also dispensing fees, and they pay a lot of money for like their DEA registrations every year, and there's a lot behind that. We have to have paid staff to check the medications, sell the medication, recheck the medication that it's right. We have stocking fees. We have to pay for that. And sometimes
Yeah.
we discount other services because we increase the price of a little bit.
We still have a partnership with the vet.
But there's
I'm gonna go into this a little bit more, y'all. I'm sorry. Only because we only have an hour. But this is good. This is communication. This is good. So I don't want anybody to feel awkward about it. This is a safe place for this. But some of it is, so just from both perspectives, some of it is we do typically get shelter pricing on our medications if you have an account with the vendors. So our prices are actually lower than what the private practitioner receives. And I'm not trying to defend or take a side, but just to kind of give some insight. But also they do tend to mark up because they have to pay for their staff and all those kinds of things. I'm going to talk about the small business ownership thing in a second. I'll take one more and then let's go to the next one. You guys are full of hate, by the way. I love it. No, I'm just kidding. No, y'all have a lot of good insight. I appreciate it. Yes, I am. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
In
hi.
our shelter, we actually call around to the veterinarians and give say, do you want to partner with us? And we do a free health check. So if
Awesome.
people walk through the door, they're able to go in and not have to pay that health check fee, but they just pay if they need medications or something like that.
Perfect.
And it is the open line of communication to say, hey, who will work with where? And through our jurisdiction, we don't just do our county, but we go out of county because we have people who come in and
To adopt.
like from 100 miles and stuff to make sure we go out that far. And I do agree with you because we do get shelter pricing, and I see the other side because I help another vet of their pricing, and it's usually triple, what we need.
And your reps will usually tell you that. They're like, don't tell the vets. And I'm like, I am one, dude. You can't tell me your secrets. But
It's a different thing.
You're right. So this is good. This is why I asked for perspectives, because I think it's more helpful to have it all out in the open and talk about it, right? Because these are things that get in the way of us partnering, okay? And I'm just going to move us on. I'd love to talk with y'all more. I just want to move us on so we don't run out of time. But from the other side of things, these might be some opinions from the veterinary side about shelters, nonprofits, rescues that I've experienced. One is competition, like you mentioned earlier. I'm not going to go into that fully because that'll take up, we won't solve that problem today, but also that's a whole nother thing. But I think my best answer for that is share your mission and demonstrate goodwill, right? That you want to partner with them. This is where your lines are. Your mission goes out to this point, and then you don't cross that point. But also letting them know how you see working together with vets. Concerns about quality of medical care, which we were kind of talking about, and some of this is just the next one as well, assumptions about competency, trustworthiness, or practicality of shelter staff. Maybe the assumption that shelter staff are all bleeding hearts and we don't know where to stop, we don't know anything about what needs to be done. These all kind of have a common theme in that you've got to talk to people and bring them in and show them what you do and how you make your decisions, or they won't know. They're going to continue to assume until you share with them. Misconceptions about how shelters operate. A lot of this is about like how you're funded. You're a branch of the ASPCA. We still get that all the time. You're a branch of the ASPCA, right? And I'm like, yeah, Sarah. I hired Sarah McLaughlin myself. So there's like, people don't know. So you just need to explain how you're funded and how you make decisions. Shelters and rescues are always begging for more. They're afraid to open the door because you're going to continue to expect free things or whatever. I put local politics because I live in Austin, and y'all can probably just imagine that those are intense, like they are everywhere. Some of it is community culture, what the expectation is for like when you make a euthanasia decision, for example, what you treat, what you don't treat, what is okay behaviorally, things like that are all variable. And then what's the appropriate role for shelters, whether we should be even vaccinated, should we, all these things. I've heard those before. All you should do is vaccinate and adopt out. Don't do any of the other stuff and the vets will do it. And I'm like, what? It's crazy. Any other ones here? at risk of starting World War II. Anybody have anything real quick? Yeah.
I will say, at least where I am, I'm on the board of directors for our local Humane Society.
Awesome.
And I got involved because there were a lot of bad things going on.
Right.
So we had some real horror stories.
Yeah.
So that has actually burned a lot of the private veterinary bridges in the area.
Yeah.
And we've gotten new management and really turned stuff around. But it really hurts the shelter society.
For sure. Their reputation is tarnished.
Yeah, because, and I never understood before I became a veterinarian, before I got involved, what was going on. So it was a tough thing, so I mean, and not to say that, the vast majority of shelters aren't doing a great job, but one isn't, and we're digging out a hole. We just had the shelter medicine program from here coming into a hole.
Oh, awesome.
And I'm the only veterinarian that volunteers time right now, and we're trying to build these relationships back up, and
it's hard. It's slow.
It's really tough.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's a marathon, so you have to keep bringing people in. You have to tell them about the changes you've made,
and that's
share your
bringing
excitement
the
about it.
community behind us again.
Yeah.
So it's been an uphill battle. So, and then that makes it hard for every other shelter in the area because they're going to be suspect. And that sucks.
Yeah. That's a valid point. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. You have another one? Yes.
So we see I'm from the shelter side, but we see some of the same issues when we're trying to partner with vets is that they've been burned before. We have a lot of vets in our area. We're in Chicago, very populated area. And what we're seeing is rescues that are not politely called vet hoppers. And what they'll do is they'll go to a vet, start a partnership, rack up a bill, not pay it, jump to another vet. And they'll continue to do this where they're racking up bills places, and then another rescue comes in and they're like, we want to partner with you, you're in our neighborhood, we've got great reviews, and they're like, no, we were burned before, we're not going to do it again. And you have to kind of explain how you're different, so we see that as a barrier as well.
Yeah, that's a big one. And hopefully some of the stuff I'm going to tell you here in a few minutes is going to help with that, because a lot of it is, again, about communication, building trust, but setting up documentation of expectations, right? And so I think if you just show professionalism and that what your expectations are different, you can help work through some of that. I'll take one more and then y'all are awesome, by the way. Thanks for talking, because I know it's morning.
Easy, I think, but we're from a rural area, and so there's no one to partner with.
Oh, good point. You're like, first we need a vet. Step one.
A few, but they're totally overwhelmed.
Right. Okay. Let me think about that for a second. I don't have an answer for that just yet. Maybe a 3D printer and you can get one that way. So I told you we would talk about small business ownership, and so this is where we're going to do that real quick. But how do vets get paid in private practice? And again, I don't want the shelter people in the room to think I'm defending the vets, and I don't want the vets to think I'm defending the shelter people. I love you both. I love you all. But this is just so you understand kind of how they make their money, and understand that they're really not getting rich on this deal. And they're not saying no to you because they drive a Mercedes or anything like that. So just to help you understand. So generally there's a practice owner. Not all, obviously with corporate practices, this looks very different. So I'm just going with the traditional practice. There's a practice owner, and I put salary question mark because oftentimes in the early years of owning a practice, you don't actually pay yourself a salary. I have not done that, but I've heard of people who've owned practices, and that sounds true. Because you're putting everything back into the business, you're just trying to make it work. A portion of the practice, eventually a portion of the practice profits will become, part of their income, but that's usually years and years down the road after they've opened the practice. So they're trying to really balance keeping the doors open, like she mentioned, and doing their part, because most people who become vets do like animals and they want to help you. I would say it's all of them, but they're not saying no because they don't want to help you or they hate humane societies generally. But finances are a thing. Okay. The associate vets, so the non-owners that work there regularly, usually are paid on production, and so this has come up for us as a shelter where a private practice owner will say, yes, I want to partner, but I'm going to be the only one who helps you guys because I don't want my other vets to take a salary cut. because they're not getting paid for free services, okay? And not that that's going to stop a lot of associate vets. They still want to do it. But just keep that in mind that they're really doing it for free, like legit for free if they're doing it. Relief vets or contract vets, they're just paid a daily rate. They often don't have any decision making in the practice. They're just there to kind of cover gaps in the schedule. And then I've done this presentation with one of my classmates from vet school who owns a chain of practices in Austin. So what he told me is usually about 10% profit margin is like if you're doing awesome in private practice. So that's doesn't give a lot of wiggle. You can imagine 10%, 10 to 20%. And so within that profit margin, that's anything that you can sink back into the practice to buy new equipment. That's the gap that you have to give away services to your friends and family. All these other things that draw on that 10 to 20% down here. And so shelters and rescues, you're really competing too with those people or those other draws on the profit. Good Sams that bring in pets. Everybody's like, the vets don't want to help me. I just found this dog in my backyard with a collar, and I've called him Sam his whole life. So they're getting asked by a lot of people, I guess is my point, and there's not a lot to work with. So let's move on from that. Okay. It seems like all I'm talking about is barriers. I promise we're going to get to how to fix them. Remember that this is my slide where I try to help everybody remember to be really gracious for anything that vets give you, because the discounted services don't only include what you see on the surface, like, oh, we got x-rays for X amount, but the vet's time in evaluating those, their knowledge and skill, which they had to pay a lot of money. I'm still paying for my knowledge and skills, y'all, and it's expensive. So that they're paying labor costs for their staff, supply costs. And remember also that you're offsetting, anytime you bring in a shelter pet, you're taking maybe an hour of their time that would have been a paying client's time. So it's almost like they're giving you double of what they're actually giving you. And this is a long just piece of a study that basically just showed that more than 99% of vets offer some kind of discount in some way or giveaway services. So vets are out there donating. It just may not be, I don't want it to not meet your expectation and you feel like it's not enough. Okay. I'm going to kind of skim through these because we all know what these challenges are. This is a dog from a hoarding. In case we did, does anybody know what this is called? This is called shitlocks. This is called dreadlocks of doo-doo right here. It was bad. So we know all these things, right? High turnover, there's always more animals. It doesn't matter. You do a clear the shelter event, the next day you're full again. There's limited resources. Animals with medical needs never seem to end. It's hard to find vets that can work in shelter medicine or have interest in it, on and on and on, right? And then from the private practice side, there's the personal debt pressure. Maybe they just bought a house, they own a practice, they're paying off their car. There's competition or perceived competition too. Internet pharmacies, low-cost clinics, specialists, all that, there's all this, they have to keep their doors open. The economy, because pet owners are paying with their disposable income, so this is what's left over after groceries and utilities and all those things, is paying for their vet bills. All the things we talked about with small business ownership. Obviously, building the practice. If they want to grow the practice, they need to invest more of that profit back in. So all these things are just challenges to keep in mind. Okay. So now that I've made y'all either hate each other or appreciate each other, I'm not sure which side we're on, we're going to talk about benefits to the veterinarians if we partner with shelters or rescues. And if you have others, let me know, because I probably haven't thought of everything. But a big one that we see is new clients or patients, we're adopting out thousands of animals a year. This is a great source for new clients for the vets in town. A lot of these folks, some may have relationships with vets already, but a lot of these folks are either looking for a new vet because they're not particularly bound to a practice, or they haven't used a vet before, or this is their first pet, or they just moved here, or whatever. So it's a good opportunity. This is one that we started to offer because we were trying to think of what else we could do for our vet partners, but it's help with strays and abandoned animals. And so we tell them whenever we're talking with them, hey, if you have pets dumped at your shelter or at your practice, or animals signed over because people couldn't afford XYZ, let us know, because we can help with that. I mean, that's what we do, right? We rehome animals, and vets typically aren't in the business of rehoming. Sometimes they'll have a cage up front in the lobby trying to do that stuff. But that's an a relatively easy perk to offer. A direct line of communication with the shelter. This is a bigger perk than you realize for the vets in the area. Sometimes they're trying to figure out who to call because they want to tell you that they diagnosed something with distemper, for example. And have you guys all tried to call your own shelter? It's awesome, right? No one answers before noon, if at all, because everybody's cleaning in the morning. And then if anyone does answer, it's usually the volunteer coordinator because they're the only one at their desk. And people get bounced around. They're not getting who they need to talk to, or someone doesn't have the information. It's really frustrating. So oftentimes if we can provide a point of contact that these vets can reach out to, even if it's a designated line that someone will check regularly, that's a big plus. There can be tax benefits. This doesn't necessarily mean for their services, but if they give actual goods or monetary donations, in-kind donation of services is not 100% tax deductible. And then obviously just good image in the community. This is something they'll want to promote. We help the Austin Humane Society, we partner with these groups, blah, blah, blah. The benefits to shelters, I think, are equally as awesome. So we could get discounted or free vet services for shelter pets. This might be post-adoption support. Is VCA up here? Is that VCA? Yeah. Do y'all have a post-adoption partnership with them? Right. And I'm not here to promote VCA or anything like that. They're one of our partners. But there are groups out there that want to do post-adoption support to help pets stay in the home once they've been adopted. So you don't want to have those returns within a week or two because they have diarrhea or they sneeze, and that helps with some of that. Also, this is a perfect opportunity, especially if you don't have a vet on staff at your shelter or group, to get the expertise and guidance of a licensed veterinarian. I think our vet partners also add legitimacy for our shelter, so we can tell people we partner with these vets, this whole list, they all think we're good guys, so you should too, right? So that helps. And then we'll talk about how veterinarians can be your ambassadors in the community too. Because remember, you're adopting out a lot of animals, but they're also working with a whole bunch of people. And you need people and they need animals. So you can see how that works. Okay. Here we are. So we're talking about how veterinarians can be ambassadors for your shelter. To me, one thing we overlook quite a bit is that veterinarians are a big diversion of shelter intake, or can be. And this is obviously through offering spay neuter. They're not going to do it in high volume because they don't have time for that. They're doing a couple surgeries a day, so that's probably not going to be their biggest contributor. But with behavior counseling and referring people to training, rather than saying just take it to the shelter. This dog is not going to fit in your family, or you're going to have a baby go surrender your dog. Working with families is really keeping animals out of your shelter. And that's something you can work with the vets about too. You can have meetings with your local vets and say, what are things that you're challenged with the clients you see, and reasons that they feel like they need to give up their pet, and then maybe y'all could bring in somebody to help teach them on that subject if they're not behavior people, for example. They do a lot of client education, obviously. I think a big one that we forget is pet identification and how many strays are coming through our shelters, but also that people take to the vet clinic and say, I just found this dog. But the vets have a prime opportunity to make sure that microchipping is happening. We preach about this a lot locally, and we're used to it, right? We're like, microchips, yeah, it's part of the day-to-day, but it's not a given in private practice. When I was in private practice, we didn't microchip everything. It just wasn't the prime goal. So some of that is just sharing with your vet partners how critical that is for y'all, especially if your area is prone to disasters. I mean, pets get out every day, but especially during floods and fires and hurricanes and all kinds of things. And they really can be the front line for helping get pets identified so they get back home and don't come into your facility. But these are also other ways vets are ambassadors for us. A lot of times they're donors, either in services or cash or x-ray machines or whatever, equipment. They can be volunteers. We typically have vets show up in force during disaster responses. And these can be some of your best friends during those situations. You mentioned sitting on a board members, that's a great spot. Adopter referrals, and what I'm talking about here is that classmate I mentioned earlier, we send new adoptees to him, so he gets new clients that way. But also if he has a family that's looking to get a new pet, like say they've euthanized an animal in the past and now they're there, or they're asking him what he recommends for where they should get a new pet, he'll send them to us. So it can go both ways. Obviously low cost or free services. Low cost or free services for adopters post-adoption. We have a clinic that does free heartworm treatment for the animals adopted from us, but they just cover the shots. They cover the amiticide, but they don't cover like other diagnostics, so that way they don't go completely broke on it, but they're giving away the amiticide. They might be advocates just in general for your organization or provide emergency support. Do y'all have others? Anything I'm forgetting? Okay. Let's see. Okay, so now we're gonna start to get into the actual what to do about all this, right? So these are some types of partnership. We've kind of hit on some of these. These are roles vets can play. Maybe they're doing free post-adoption vet exams. This is pretty common. We have vets call all the time and they're like, we want to get on your list. And we're like, which list? And the list that goes in your adoption packet, maybe, that says you can go to clinics A through C and they'll do a free exam. That's helpful to your adopters. Maybe they give you discounted or free services before adoption directly to the shelter, or they do it for adopted pets. Maybe they sponsor events. Maybe they're, come in and do tabling at some of your public events, community events, things like that. They might give you financial support. They can also do education. You can have them come in and talk about different disease processes. Probably if you do that and you haven't worked with that vet in the past, just make sure y'all talk about kind of the gist of what you're wanting them to get to, also because things are handled differently in private practice versus the shelter, depending on what disease process they're talking about or educating on. And like I mentioned, they can be ambassadors. On the shelter side, we've talked about all these, I think, but you can refer adopted pets, you could place strays or abandoned animals for them, and then just recognizing them is a big one. And we'll talk about how we've done that and see if y'all have other ideas, but putting them on your website and stuff like that. Okay, so now we're getting into building relationships. We've all talked about why we hate each other and all the things that are frustrating. So we're going to talk about how to fix it. So step number 1 is exploration. So this is just trying to figure out who could be a good partner. A good place to start, like you mentioned before, is what are the community vets' feelings about the shelter or rescue? Like, do the vets in town hate us? Do they think we're okay? Do they think we're pretty awesome? And a lot of that probably has to be kind of on the recon side of things, or you can have, I wouldn't call them up and be like, what do you think about us? But I guess you could. So you could send out surveys. You could say we're interested in, I wouldn't come from the point of view of, if you're the shelter, saying, hey, we want y'all to give us free stuff, so we want to know how you feel about us. Just say we want to make sure that the vets in our community know that we want to be good partners, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on how we run things. Or you can ask specific questions like, do you see a lot of sick pets coming from our shelter? Or what are your frustrations? Or what would make it easier for you as a vet in our community? Things like that. Identifying vets or shelters who have common goals. So we're thinking of this from both perspectives. And so some of this is starting with personal relationships. We've built a lot of partnerships that way, where a volunteer or a staff member has always used Dr. Palvino, so we talk to Dr. Palvino. Or maybe they plant the seed that, hey, I volunteer with the Austin Humane Society and they work with vet clinics, and maybe they could send you new clients or whatever. Would you be interested in them talking to you about it? That's a good place to start. It's networking, just like we're all used to that. It's who you know and utilizing those connections. So also think about, if you do have a vet on staff or a vet who works with your group, think who they know. So they have classmates, they have vet friends in the community. Are there vets that they know that might be willing to partner? I will say this does get exponentially easier if you do have a vet already working with you, because automatically the other vets will trust you a little bit more. I hate to say it, but it is. It's kind of like, well, she seems to think they're okay and she's a vet. It does make it a lot easier. So if you do have a vet who's on your board, working with you on staff, anything like that, they're a great person to help you build these partnerships. Sometimes you can have an open house. So you have a time where vets can come see the shelter. Those might be attended, might not. Yeah, you got to bribe with food or continuing education, y'all. That's the way to get vets anywhere.
We're not like human doctors. We're happy with
any food.
It doesn't have to be fancy.
That's right. Leverage, use it against them. They need food and CE. And so if you have partnerships with vendors, like you have IDEX or whoever, I'm just throwing out, you can ask their reps, will you come do a CE event at the shelter for the local vets? And that way the company sponsors, they bring the food, they provide the CE, and then you're just hosting, and then you can say, at the end we're going to do a tour, or at the beginning we're going to do a tour, whatever, and that's your opening. I wouldn't go with any hard asks right away. You're just trying to build a relationship. It's a first date. You're not asking them to marry you today. Okay. Another thing we've done is just doing visits to the vet clinics near our facility, but we're usually that's not going to be a cold call type situation. So that'll be if you already kind of have an opening, somebody knows them, you've already talked to somebody, and you say, would it be helpful if we come talk to your staff and kind of hear, what their reservations are about working with the shelter, or what kind of animals they're seeing come through, or what kind of challenges they've had with shelter pets coming in, and then you talk through with the staff, because oftentimes the staff is influencing the decision as well at the vet clinic. They're like, oh, I hate that place because this random thing happened last week or whatever. So you can go in and just be real chill and explain how you work. And again, you're not proposing anything hard. You just want to kind of hear what their worries are, what their common problems are. Okay, next up is knowing what you want. So considering your mission with respect to the vet community. So really take an honest look at what does your group do and how does it align or not align with what vets are doing in the community, because those will bring up real quickly if there's overlap or things that your mission can be considered to be competition. You need to be aware, and be ready to talk about those things because they're going to come up whether you like it or not. So thinking about if your mission's solely rehoming, you're probably not going to have a lot of overlap conflict. But if you're doing public service or public wellness and free ultrasounds and things like that, they might be pissed about that. And so you just kind of need to go in knowing what those things are, okay? And then if you do have things where the veterinary community is probably going to be a little irritated, or you've heard things, or you have specific comments back from the veterinary community that they're mad about something you're doing, or they don't like this piece, don't start with the people who are mad at you. Start with a friendly person, someone that does like what you're doing, or at least parts of what you're doing, and get their honest feedback and try to build from there. What are your goals? What are your long-term plans? Are you planning to open a new shelter in 5 years, and it's going to include new services that could affect the veterinarians in the community? Those are all things to kind of have in mind as you're having these conversations. How do you require each other's help? We talked about a lot of ways that could look, but think really hard about what your primary issues are. If it's, for us, for example, for a long time it was just having support for things like radiology, because we don't have in-house radiology. So we send out animals to get x-rays, and then they send them back, send the x-rays back for us to look at. So that's something, that was one of our initial things, but now we're getting more into, I'll get to you in a second, now we're getting more into trying to figure out ways to get our long-stay medical cases out faster. So I think our next thing that we're thinking about talking to the vet partners about is, would they consider sponsoring a certain pet? So let's say, I'm going to make up one, Gus he's 14 and he's got dental stuff going on, and maybe he's got chronic skin and he's on a special diet. Y'all don't see those, right? Maybe just in Austin, I'm not sure. But so then we can ask this vet partner, would you consider sponsoring Gus? And then we put some signage on Gus's cage, and we're like, this pet's sponsored by Firehouse Animal Health Center. And then Gus's people get referred to Firehouse. So by sponsor, I mean maybe they cover his special diet post-adoption, so the adopter doesn't have to pay for that. Maybe they're, they'll offer up to some certain amount of initial vet services for the adopter, something that helps relieve that barrier of adoption. So just be creative. You have to think about what your problems are first before you can figure out how you want people to help you fix them. You had something?
I'd recommend sharing data, especially anything that might be relevant to that business, because when we share 10 years worth of rabies data, where 91% of the cats and 53% of the dogs going through our program were vaccinated for rabies, and not going to the public health clinic, the free public health clinics, it's pretty demonstrative that these people are going free for basic veterinary care.
Right.
We also found out several of them were existing clients.
That's a great point, and I need to add that in here. But sharing your numbers and kind of the background for why you do what you do and why it's so important to the community. Let's see. Okay. That's what we're doing on time. All right, 15 minutes. Cool. Okay. So this is related to the last one, so this isn't a separate thing, but thinking about what we hope, if from the shelter perspective, I should say from the from both perspectives because they're kind of listed separately, but what are you hoping to achieve from these partnerships? So again, related to what your goals are you hoping to get free of post-adoption exams? That's usually a pretty easy place to start. Most vets are willing to do that. Like, oh, you just adopted a pet from AHS, then you can bring them in within X amount of time and I'll do a free exam. That's not a big loss of income for them, and then they're hopefully building a relationship. And I think that's a good perk for adopters too. That's, I think, a commonly offered partnership. Are they doing care for the shelter pets before they leave? Are they giving money? We've talked about a lot of these already. Some of it, again, like I mentioned, the credibility earlier, some of it is the prestige of the relationship. If you have a partnership with the vet school that's near you, if you have one of those, if you have a partnership, anything that brings credibility to the shelter is a good thing for you, and helps you build other partnerships. You may just see it as, try to not stay short-sighted and just see the partnership for what it is. See it as a stepping stone to build other partnerships. It's kind of like, have y'all ever had a really good friend that has another friend that you're not sure about? You're like, really? Why do you like her? I'm kind of mean, so I guess it might just be me. But you think, well, she's got to be somewhat okay because Lori likes her, and I like Lori. So it's kind of the same thing, right? Like, it matters more than you think. So any kind of partnerships you can build on to demonstrate that other people like you is helpful when you're building new partnerships. And then what the vet hopes to achieve, and that's important to ask them. A lot of times, and I think I go into this more, I can't remember now. When we meet with our vet partners initially, I'll say, what do you hope to get out of this? Or what do you want to get? And they'll always go, we just want to help you guys out. We just want to do good things. And so I won't let them do that. I say, that's awesome, and I know that's why you want to do it, but I want you to get more out of it because we value so much. This is what you're doing for us. Try to explain. And they'll appreciate it even if they don't tell you this, but you almost have to come up with ways that they will benefit and force it on them and try to figure out once you start suggesting things like, well, do you need new clients? We've had one clinic that said he doesn't need new clients because he bought a place that had been open forever and he was trying to actually kind of pare it down a little bit. Do they just want community goodwill? They want people to know they're good guys because they're a new clinic in the area that maybe they've had a iffy reputation or whatever. Then they might want more shared PR recognition on your website. That might be more important. Do they want, I didn't put this up here, but usually this isn't a primary thing, but do they want recognition in the form of coming to your special events, like your big fundraising gala? Do they want tickets for their staff so they can, recognize their staff or whatever? You just have to talk through that stuff and suggest things and see what sticks. Start the conversation. So this is as simple as setting up meetings with partners. My probably most important point on this one is just start with one. Don't try to go out tomorrow and say, we're starting a new thing and we want to build vet partners, so who wants to partner? And it's hard. It's like, not to reference dating all the time, but it would be real hard to decide you're dating tomorrow and go date 10 people at once. So just like start with one relationship, try to build that, get it nice and solid. And then that relationship will actually expedite how you build the future relationships because you have that to say, we already partner with Firehouse. This is how that works. Are you interested in doing something like that? What other thoughts do you have? And it gives you something to work with. So really focus on the first one and make sure you've got a good solid relationship before you move on. This is the time to talk with them about ideas, their goals, what they hope to get. This is going to be that conversation where they bring up the things that piss them off about you or the things that have frustrated them about your organization in the past. And deal with that head on. So this is the time to do that. What is the plan to deal with sick and injured adopted animals? Like talking through logistics and letting them know it's okay. And usually we'll have this first conversation usually with leadership, whoever's making the decision about whether to partner. And then we'll plan a follow-up meeting with their team. So usually vet techs, receptionists, everybody. And we go talk with them and we say, what are the things that worry you? We talk about, at first we'll start off with just a real short, this is what we do, these are the programs we have. What we're talking about doing with your clinic is having pets come over from the shelter that need some medical care that we're not able to provide in the shelter, and then just get their input. And then we do that again after about 6 months because we want to see what their challenges have been. For example, the emergency clinic we work with, they often get people in the middle of the night that are bringing in little fosters of ours, and that's our plan so that our vets aren't on answering calls directly from fosters. And they don't have a way to verify that they foster for the Humane Society, so they're worried. They have this concern that people are going to gyp us and say that they're a foster. And so what I tell them, I was like, that's never happened. We have yet to get an invoice from you guys that was not for our pet. So don't worry. Let us worry about that. If we have to pay for one every few years, it's fine. But that hasn't happened. So you can kind of quell some of these fears and anxieties by having those conversations. So I recommend doing it with leadership, but also with the full team, because the receptionist, the staff, if you're on the vet side of things building with the shelter, the adoption team that's referring people to you, they're the ones that are going to affect a lot of this. It's not just the primary decision makers. And then just stay calm and open to feedback, right? Just take a sedative or whatever you have to do before you go. Okay. Consider your compatibility. So this isn't the time to force things. If you start having those conversations and you're a shelter and you go talk with this vet and he's like, I'm trying to think of something extreme. What's something extreme? I'm against spay neuter. I'm against spay neuter. And you're like, well, that's hard. Sometimes like you just can't force it. So you're going to have to, this is, again, it's kind of like dating again, y'all. You just have to, I don't date anymore. So I'm just giving old school examples, but you have to really see if they're compatible. And if you're at first feeling like maybe they're not compatible, see if there's a way to make them compatible. But if not, just cut your losses and be like, this was worth it because if nothing else, they know us and they know we're friendly and we're open to partnership, but you don't have to force anything. Do you have something?
We have a local veterinarian that doesn't live in pediatric spay neuter.
Oh, right. That's,
They don't do anything under 6 months.
yeah, that's a valid one.
You know,
Yeah,
that's fine, that's her prerogative.
that's all good.
We send things over there to get spayed neutered that are over 6 months.
Yeah, and depending on how hostile she is about her opinion, now is probably not the time to like send her studies and force it down her throat. Start with someone who's cool with it. Yeah, and that's okay.
We are able to help them.
Right. Yeah. And that might be a follow-up, if you still say she's the only vet in the area or she's still the partner that y'all think is a good fit overall, except for that one thing, then maybe it can be compatible because you say, you know what, that's cool, I respect that. We're going to do all this stuff. Exactly. Exactly. You can still work with those folks. So this is the time to think about that. Like, is it still compatible or are there lines in the sand that it can't be crossed? Anybody have anything else on that? Okay. Okay. And like I mentioned before, remember that you need to offer options for recognition because more often than not, shelter partners or vet partners haven't thought through that. They just know what their problems are and what they're trying to solve. Like the vet's thinking, I need more clients, and the shelter has people coming out with new pets. But they haven't thought like maybe how they can help you to get the new pets. So suggest things and just be kind of, calm and relaxed about it. Like these are possible things we've done before. If you have any other cool ideas, sometimes people get real creative with it. We have some partners that have done the same exact type of partnership for 20 years, and we have others that are constantly coming at me with different stuff. And they're like, what if we did this? What if we did that? And I'm like, cool. There's a balance. So you kind of have to just learn where they're coming from and what they're hoping to get from it, but then also suggest things to help benefit them. This one I mentioned earlier, but this is so critical, and I know this seems basic, but please, like some kind of written agreement. It doesn't need to be a contract or be passed through lawyers or I think this automatically puts people on like, oh crap, they want an agreement. It doesn't have to be super specific. To me, this is more about outlining the expectations for both sides. And you can explain that to the other partner. Like, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page so that we don't frustrate you. And we also, this is where I should have put an example of ours. If anybody wants to see an example, I can send it to you. I'll put my email at the end. But I think I took it out because you can't see it well on PowerPoint. But it's important to have point of contact on there. Like, who should they call if they have, say the vet clinic sees an adopter and there is something like not okay with this pet and they need to contact somebody at the shelter because that adopter's driving your way and they're so pissed right now. Or they're like, hey, we need to do this because this dog has this problem and we'll help you with it, but we want to make sure we get the pet okay and that the client ends up happy. They need to know who to call in the moment, not to send an email or get a voicemail that's going to be returned in 4 days. And vice versa, if you're calling from the shelter and you're trying to figure out who you ask, if an issue bubbles up. Lately we've had that same EC, we've had a bunch of new staff at the EC, and they're starting to tell our fosters that the only way they can bring the foster in is if they call the AHS veterinarian for approval first. And then in the same conversation, lately it's been like, but we don't know, we don't have their on-call phone number. And I'm like, yes, you do. So sometimes stuff like that bubbles up, and then the fosters come back to us and they're like, hey, I tried to do this last night and I ended up having to pay for it because they said they didn't take your pets. And it's just because there's a new receptionist at the EC. So we worked through that. So I had to call the manager and we're just working through it. And it's all friendly. There's no like, you're stupid receptionist. You know, I'm like, hey, this happened. What do we need to do? You want us to come over and chat about with the team, like how things work and answer questions again? And she's like, no, I'll retrain. It'll be all good. So it's back and forth communication and knowing who to call for each thing. If there are services provided, it's helpful to know kind of what that amount is. So a lot of our partners will say, we'll give you up to $5,000 of free services per year. And then we track it. And if anybody wants to see our tracking thing, it's just a big spreadsheet. But we track it kind of like a checkbook, like start with 5,000, and every time we send a pet, we get an invoice and we deduct so we know where we are. And then monthly I call for balances so that we don't go over, or if we do go over, we know, so we pay them, because that's the other way. You need to make sure the partner understands if we go over, we're not going to just call you and be like, can you just wipe that bill too? Like we'll pay for whatever we went over what you gave for free. And then what the perks are, what the recognitions are. This is critical. We have one, we just call it a pledge form, and so it's pretty basic, but it shows them what to expect. And then get to work. So agree on a start date. A lot of our partners like to do things based on what their accounting timelines are for the year. If they're giving us donated services, they want it to align with their accounting. I talked a lot about maintaining ongoing communication. So this could be, if you're having a distemper outbreak at the shelter, you might just let your vet partners know that they might be seeing these things in adopted pets, and to let you know, because here's what you want to do if that happens. You can have your shelter vets or your shelter staff attend the local veterinary association meetings and talk about what's going on at the shelter. I saw this, our city vets do this quite often. They'll talk about kind of what type of cases they're seeing come through, or what the influxes are from, or if they're seeing a lot of rabies situations in the community, because they're the rabies authority. You can add them to the shelter newsletter list. And again, we talked about starting with one, because we all talk, it's a small world. Just like shelter world, vet world's the same way. It's very small, everybody kind of knows each other. So become a really great partner, and it'll be easier to have other folks partner with you. Okay, and this is basic, I think, just relationship maintenance, but make it easy to work with you. Think about when you go to talk to them. One of my favorite things is, this always shocks the vet staff, I think, but they'll go, well, what kind of cases are you going to send over from the shelter? And I'm like, well, what kind of cases do y'all want me to send? Well, are they going to be drop-offs or appointments? And I'm like, do you want drop-offs or appointments? It's like whatever the partner that's helping you, however you can make it easy for them. And that's what we tell them. Like, we want this to be simple. We want this to be easy. You're doing something critical for us by providing these services. If you want drop-offs, we'll do drop-offs. If you want somebody to wait with the appointment, that's what we'll do. If you want records, we send records. If you want a phone number, just like, they're basically a major donor, and you treat them that way. And they'll respond. So all of these things, just thinking about billing arrangements, if there are payments to be made, if they're giving you a discount but you still pay the remainder, who do the bills need to be sent to, how do they prefer you pay them? Some of our partners want credit card payments that day, others want a check mailed, talking about all that stuff. How they want appointments, do they want records sent? Another thing that I mentioned here is just about rotating your partners and thinking about, say you have 5 vet partners and you're in the shelter. Don't call like number 1 4 times this week if you can, because number 1's like, what the hell, people, I still got clients to take care of. But maybe call 1, 2, 3, and 4 and then go back, so we try to rotate. And that's not just to not overwhelm them, but it's also to make them feel needed, because we've had partners also stop partnering because they were like, y'all didn't really seem to need that service. And it was maybe something subtle, like they don't have digital x-ray and this other clinic does, so we always send the x-rays there, send animals there for x-rays, because we can get the disc back. And then this clinic feels like we didn't need them, so we use them for dentals instead, or whatever. So try to make them feel useful, because that's why they're helping you. These are just relationship things, right? So making sure you have a common vision for the partnership. It doesn't have to be a common vision for life in general, just for the partnership. That you're honest, you have open communication, and you're respectful. Don't assume that they're trying to maliciously hurt you, or their staff is stupid or anything like that. There's a mistake made, there's somebody new, just have the conversation when something goes wrong. And that's conflict resolution, which I'm sorry, I'm speeding up because we're out of time, I think. And then just another plug for graciousness. A handwritten note goes a long way, guys. So if you can mention, if you're from the shelter and you can mention specific cases they helped with and tell them what the outcome was, a lot of the vet clinics really appreciate that. They'll put it in their break room so their staff knows. I used to do that. I've gotten job offers from thank you notes before. Just from writing people thank you notes and saying, we love you guys, we couldn't do this without you, you're here, blah, blah, blah. And then I list the pets, and then they seriously called me to ask if I wanted to come work at the clinic. I didn't, obviously, because I'm still here. But these are really impactful to people, and people don't get handwritten notes anymore, and they don't get updates. They're just left to wonder. So this is a big deal. Maybe you put certificates or plaques up at the shelter or the clinic. I talked about recognizing online. That's a big one now, with social media posts, things like that. And that goes both ways. Vet partners can put social media posts and say, we have Gus here from AHS today. He's here for this procedure. We love AHS. You should go adopt from there. Woo! You know, it can go both ways. Listing vet partners in adoption packets, inviting them to your gala, etc. Okay. Any questions? This is my email if anybody needs anything or has follow-up questions. We're pretty much out.